Good evening, friends. Welcome back to Sleepy Radio, where the past becomes a gentle tide that carries you softly into dreams. Tonight, we're going to drift into something truly specialer, quiet journey through the kitchens and banquet halls of medieval times, where the strangest and most wonderful dishes were created by hands long turned to dust. Before we begin, I invite you to dim your lights, settle under your blanket, adjust your pillow just so, and let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders. Feel the coolness of the air against your face, the warmth where your body meets the mattress. Tonight, there's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let your mind wander through these stories like smoke drifting from an old hearth. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, if these tales guide you gently toward sleep, consider tapping like and subscribe bonely if it feels right. No pressure, just an invitation to join us again on another night for another story. Now, let me tell you about 5 incredible dishes from medieval history. Not the ones you might expect. Not simple bread and stew, though those had their place. No. Tonight, we'll explore the strange, the surprising, the absolutely fascinating foods that graced medieval tables. Foods that tell us so much about how people lived, what they valued, and how they found joy in a world so different from ours. Close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe slowly, and let's begin. Let me take you back, way back, to a great hall in England in the year 1465. The stone walls rise high above you, and though it's a summer evening, there's still a chill in the air. Tapestries hang along the walls, their threads telling stories of hunts and battles, and the floor is covered in fresh rushes that smell faintly of lavender and rosemary. Can you picture it? The flicker of torchlight dancing across faces, the murmur of conversation, the anticipation hanging in the air like mist over a morning field. Tonight is special. Tonight is a feast, and not just any feast. This is a banquet for nobility, perhaps celebrating a wedding or a treaty. And the kitchen has been working for days to prepare something that will astonish every guest who walks through those heavy wooden doors. You're seated at a long table, the wood smooth and dark with age. Around you, lords and ladies in their finest clothes lean forward in anticipation. Servants move through the shadows, their footsteps soft. And then, from the kitchen passageway, comes a sight that makes everyone fall silent. A peacock, a whole peacock, but not as nature made it. No, this peacock has been transformed into something between food and art, between meal and miracle. Let me tell you exactly what you're seeing and how it came to be. The dish is called a peacock spectacular, or sometimes a peacock in its pride. And it's one of the most extraordinary things medieval cooks ever created. Imagine this: the peacock has been carefully skinned, keeping every single feather attached to the hide, keeping the head with its small crown of plumes intact. Then the bird was roasted, seasoned with expensive spices, pepper from India, ginger from the Far East, cinnamon that cost more than most people earned in a month. The meat was cooked until tender and fragrant. But here's where it gets truly wild. After roasting, the cooks took that skin with all its magnificent feathers, and they carefully draped it back over the cooked bird. They positioned it so the peacock looked alive, its tail fanned out in that iconic display of iridescent blues and greens and golds. The head was lifted high, the eyes sometimes replaced with gilded decorations that caught the firelight. Some cooks even stuffed the beak with spiced wool that they could set alight. So the peacock entered the hall, breathing fire like a dragon from legend. Can you imagine being in that hall? The gasp that went through the crowd? This wasn't just dinner. This was theater, spectacle, a demonstration of wealth and power, and the incredible skill of the kitchen staff who could pull off such a feat. Now, you might be wondering why. Why go to such extraordinary lengths for a bird that, let's be honest, doesn't even taste that remarkable? Peacock meat is lean, a bit tough, gamey in flavor, but it's not nearly as delicious as a good roasted goose or a well-prepared chicken. So why did medieval nobles go absolutely wild for these peacock displays? The answer tells us so much about medieval life. You see, in those times, food wasn't just about feeding hungry bellies. Food was communication. Food was politics. Food was art and status and religion and entertainment, all rolled into one. When a lord presented a peacock spectacular at his feast, he was telling his guests several things at once. First, he was demonstrating wealth. Peacocks weren't native to most of Europe. They had to be imported or bred in special menageries. They were expensive, exotic, and rare. Just having one was a flex, as we might say today. Second, he was showing off his kitchen staff. Only the most skilled cooks could pull off this dish. The skinning alone required incredible precision and patience. One wrong cut and the whole thing was ruined. Third, he was creating a memorable experience. Guests would talk about this feast for years. They'd tell their friends, their families. The reputation of the host would spread far and wide. And there was symbolism too. The peacock was associated with pride, yes, but also with immortality and resurrection in Christian tradition. Some believed that peacock meat didn't decay, that it was somehow preserved by the bird's own special nature. This wasn't true, of course, but the belief added another layer of meaning to serving peacock at important occasions. Let's sink deeper into the preparation, because it's the details that make this story truly soothing, truly rich. Imagine you're in the kitchen now, the day before the feast. It's warm from the cooking fires that burn constantly in the massive hearth. The ceiling is blackened with soot from decades of smoke. Herbs hang in bundles from the rafters, thyme, sage, bay leaves, and the air is thick with their scent mixed with wood smoke and the earthy smell of root. Vegetables stored in barrels along the walls. The head cook, let's call him William, has been planning this peacock for weeks. He's a man of about 50, his face weathered and serious, his hands scarred from years of knives and hot pots and kitchen accidents. But his eyes, when he looks at that peacock, show something like tenderness. This is his art. This is his way of creating beauty in a world that can be harsh and cold and unforgiving. William begins with the skinning. He's done this before, many times, but each time his heart beats a little faster. The peacock is already dead, dispatched humanely, and hung for a few days to tenderize the meat. Now it lies on the work table, its feathers still magnificent even in death. William makes his first incision at the back of the neck, working slowly, carefully, always cutting away from the feathers, never toward them. His apprentice, a boy of 15 named Thomas, watches with wide eyes, learning. Hours pass. The skin peels away gradually, revealing the flesh beneath. William talks softly as he works, explaining his technique to Thomas. "Patience," he says. "Hurry, and you'll tear it. Tear it, and the Lord's feast is ruined. Steady hands, steady breath." Finally, the skin comes free, still attached to the feet and head, a complete feathered garment for a bird-shaped form. William sets it aside carefully, draped over a frame he's constructed from willow branches to hold its shape. Now for the roasting. The meat is rubbed with salt and pepper, both precious commodities. Into the cavity go aromatic herbs, rosemary from the castle garden, sage, and a small apple studded with cloves that cost a day's wages for a common laborer. The bird goes on to a spit over the fire, and Thomas's job for the next several hours is to turn it, turn it, turn it, keeping the rotation steady so the meat cooks evenly and doesn't burn. The smell that fills the kitchen is incredible, smoky and savory, with those bright notes of herb and spice cutting through. Other kitchen workers pause in their tasks to inhale deeply, their stomachs rumbling even though they've been nibbling scraps all day as they work. One of the privileges of kitchen work is that you rarely go truly hungry, even if you're eating trimmings and bits that would never grace the Lord's table. When the meat is cooked through and golden, William lets it cool just enough to handle. Then comes the most delicate part of all, redressing the bird. The roasted peacock is positioned on a large wooden trencher, a thick slice of stale bread that will serve as both plate and decoration. Then William and Thomas work together to pull the feathered skin back over the meat, stretching it gently, securing it with small wooden pins where necessary, arranging the tail feathers in that famous fan display. They work by candlelight now because it's grown late. The kitchen is quieter. Most of the other servants have gone to grab a few hours of sleep before the feast tomorrow. Just the two of them, and the soft sound of their breathing, and the occasional pop from the fire burning low in the hearth. "There," William says, finally, stepping back. The peacock stands before them, looking almost alive in the flickering light. Tomorrow they'll add the finishing touches, the gilded decorations, perhaps some gold leaf if the Lord is feeling especially extravagant, the spiced wool for the fire-breathing effect. But the main work is done. Thomas is exhausted but elated. "It's beautiful," he whispers. William nods slowly. It is." He's thinking about how quickly it will be dismantled tomorrow night, how guests will pull apart what took him so many hours to create. But that's the nature of his art. Food is temporary, fleeting, existing only for a moment before it's consumed and gone forever. But the memory lasts, and perhaps that's enough. Let's drift forward now to the feast itself. You're back in that great hall, and the moment has come. Trumpets sound, yes, actual trumpets, announcing the arrival of the peacock, just as they might announce the arrival of a visiting dignitary. The doors from the kitchen open, and William himself carries the great bird on its trencher, holding it high, processing through the hall with slow, ceremonial steps. The guests are clapping, exclaiming, rising from their seats to get a better look. The peacock's tail catches the torchlight and seems to glow with an inner fire. And then, with a flourish, William touches a lit taper to the beak, and suddenly the bird appears to breathe flame, smoke curling from its mouth in impossible, magical tendrils. The hall erupts in applause and laughter and delighted cries. The Lord at the head of the table is beaming, pleased with the reaction, pleased with William, pleased with this demonstration of his household's excellence. This is power, but it's also joy. For a moment, everyone in this hall is united in their appreciation of this absurd, wonderful creation. And then the carving begins. The peacock is dismantled, the feathers carefully removed and set aside. They'll be kept and used again, perhaps at another feast, because they're far too valuable to waste. The meat is sliced and distributed, starting with the highest-ranking guests. Each person receives a portion, along with a rich sauce made from wine and spices and crushed almonds. The meat is indeed tough and gamey, but nobody really cares. They're not here for the flavor. They're here for the experience, for the story they'll tell, for this moment of wonder in their ordinary lives. You take a bite of your portion. The meat is dense, flavorful in its way. The sauce helps considerably. Around you, conversation resumes, voices rising and falling like music. Someone is laughing. Somewhere a dog barks, hoping for scraps. The fire in the great hearth crackles and pops. The smoke drifts up toward the shadowed ceiling, and for a moment you feel completely part of this time, this place. These people who are so different from us and yet so similar. They too wanted to impress each other. They too found joy in beauty and absurdity. They too gathered with friends and family to share food and stories and laughter. The peacock, spectacular, was more than just a meal. It was a medieval special effect, a way of bringing wonder into lives that were often hard and short and filled with struggle. And there's something deeply touching about that, isn't there? The human needs to create beauty, even beauty that's temporary, especially beauty that's temporary. And as we leave that warm hall, as the feast continues behind us and we drift back through the centuries toward your quiet room, toward your comfortable bed, I want you to hold on to that feeling, that sense of people trying their best to make something memorable, something special. The care that William put into his work, the delight on Thomas's young face, the shared moment of wonder when the peacock entered the hall. Let those images become softer now, blurrier, as sleep begins to tug at the edges of your consciousness. The torchlight fades, the voices grow distant, and we move gently forward toward our next story, our next window into the fascinating world of medieval food. Now, let your mind wander to a different scene, a different time. It's a cool spring afternoon in the year 1390, and we're in France. Not in a great castle this time, but in a more modest stone manor house, the home of a wealthy merchant who's made his fortune in the cloth trade. The windows are small, but glass panes, still a luxury, and they let in soft, diffused light that falls across the wooden floors in gentle rectangles. In the kitchen, something magical is happening. A dish is being prepared that exists in a space between sweet and savory, between medicine and indulgence, between necessity and luxury. It's called blancmange, and if you've heard that word before in a modern context, I can promise you that what you're thinking of bears only the faintest resemblance to this medieval creation today. Blancmange might make you think of a simple, wobbly dessert, maybe flavored with almond and shaped in a mold. Sweet, uncomplicated, something you might serve at a church potluck. But medieval blancmange, this was something else entirely. This was alchemy in a bowl. A dish that required skill and patience and ingredients from around the known world. Let me paint you the picture. The cook preparing this dish is a woman named Marguerite. She's younger than William from our last story, maybe 35, and she runs this kitchen with quiet competence. She's not preparing for a huge feast tonight, just a family dinner. But the merchant's wife has specifically requested blancmange because the merchant himself has been feeling unwell. Nothing serious, just a spring cold that's left him tired and without much appetite. And blancmange, in medieval thinking, was perfectly invalid food. Nourishing, easy to digest, gentle on the stomach, and believed to have healing properties that could restore a person's natural balance. So what exactly is medieval blancmange? Let's start with the name. Blanc means white, and mange means eat or food. White food. And the dish lived up to that. Name it was pale, almost ghostly in appearance, which was actually part of its appeal. In medieval cuisine, color meant something. White foods were associated with purity, with refinement, with the kind of delicacy that suited aristocratic palates. The base of the dish was rice. Now, that might surprise you, because we don't tend to think of rice as a medieval European ingredient. But by the 14th century, rice had been cultivated in Spain and Italy for quite some time, brought there by Arab traders and farmers who knew its secrets. It was expensive, yes, but not impossibly so for a wealthy merchant's family. Marguerite begins by taking her rice. She has a precious store of it, in a ceramic jar on a high shelf, and grinding it, not cooking it whole, but actually grinding the dried grains into a powder. This takes time. She uses a mortar and pestle, the steady rhythm of grinding becoming almost meditative, the sound of stone on grain, over and over, until the rice becomes a fine, silky flour. Can you hear it? That soft, grinding sound. Let it become a backdrop to this story, a gentle, repetitive percussion that's somehow soothing. Marguerite's arms work steadily, her breathing even. She's done this so many times that her mind can wander while her hands work. She's thinking about the garden, about whether the peas are ready to harvest yet. She's thinking about her daughter, who's 12 now, and learning to cook, who'll need to know these recipes when she runs her own household someday. She's thinking about nothing in particular, and everything, the way your mind does during repetitive tasks. Once the rice is ground fine enough, Marguerite sets it aside and turns to her next ingredient, chicken. This is where medieval blancmange gets really interesting, because, yes, this is a dish that combines rice, chicken, sugar, and almonds. I know that sounds absolutely wild to modern tastes. We're so used to strict divisions between sweet and savory, between dessert and main course. But medieval cooks didn't think that way. They thought in terms of balance, of combining flavors and textures in ways that pleased the palate and supported health. The chickenia, nice plump hen, hath already been poached in water with a little salt and a bay leaf. Now Marguerite takes the tender meat and shreds it very fine, not chunks, but delicate strands that will almost dissolve into the dish, providing protein and substance without overwhelming the delicate texture she's aiming for. The sound of her knife working through the meat is soft and rhythmic. The kitchen is warm, but not hot, comfortable. Through the window, she can see the garden where new leaves are unfurling on the fruit trees. Spring is a hopeful time, a time of renewal. And there's something about making this white, pure dish that feels appropriate to the season. Next comes almond milk, and this is the ingredient that really makes the dish special. Almond milk isn't a modern invention, not by a long shot. Medieval cooks used it constantly, especially during Lent, when dairy was forbidden, but people still needed liquid for cooking. Marguerite made this milk herself yesterday. She took sweet almonds, blanched them to remove the skins, then ground them with water until the liquid turned creamy and white. She strained it through a cloth, squeezing out every drop of precious milk. And now she has a bowl of liquid that smells faintly sweet and nutty, and looks like something magical. Now comes the cooking. Marguerite combines her rice flour, her shredded chicken, and her almond milk in a pot. She adds a little rose water, just a few drops, enough to give a floral hint without overwhelming anything. Then sugar, which in 1390 was still phenomenally expensive, almost as much a medicine as a sweetener. It comes from Cyprus or Sicily in hard gray-brown cones that have to be chipped off and crushed before use. Marguerite is generous with it today because this is for someone who's ill, and sugar was believed to have powerful restorative properties. The pot goes over the fire, and now Marguerite's real skill comes into play. She stirs and stir and stir. The mixture must be stirred constantly, or it will stick and burn, and the whole thing will be ruined. This is a dish that demands attention, patience, and presence. You can't rush it. You can't leave it. You have to be there, stirring in a gentle, steady rhythm, watching as the mixture gradually transforms. At first, it's just liquid with some texture to it, but slowly, as the rice flour cooks, it begins to thicken. The almond milk binds with the rice. The chicken softens further, melting into the mixture. The scent rising from the pot is subtle and lovely nutty. It's not a strong smell, not like roasting meat or baking bread. It's gentle, calming, the kind of scent that makes you relax without even realizing it. Marguerite stirs, and the world narrows to just this task. The feel of the wooden spoon in her hand, the slight resistance as the mixture thickens, the warmth of the fire on her face. Outside, a bird is singing, one of those complex, tumbling songs that robins make in spring. The afternoon light is shifting, becoming slightly more golden as the day ages toward evening. Finally, after perhaps half an hour of constant stirring, the blancmange reaches the right consistency. It's thick but not solid, creamy, smooth, with no lumps or graininess. Marguerite lifts her spoon and lets some drip back into the pot. It falls slowly, holding together, and she nods with satisfaction. Perfect. She removes the pot from the fire and ladles the blancmange into a shallow bowl. The surface is glossy, pale, almost luminous. Now comes the decoration, because even this simple family dinner deserves beauty. Marguerite takes a few blanched almonds, whole ones, this time, and arranges them in a pattern on top of the blancmange. A flower, perhaps, or a geometric design. Then, with a tiny spoon, she adds a few pomegranate seeds, deep red against the white. They're from fruit she preserved last fall, kept in honey to maintain their color and sweetness. The effect is striking pure white, with small jewels of red, simple and elegant. She stands back and looks at her creation. It's not showy like the Peacock spectacular. There are no feathers, no fire-breathing, no fanfare, but it's beautiful in its own way, honest, nourishing, made with care for someone who needs comfort when the merchant comes down for dinner that evening. Still sniffling but in better spirits, he sees the blancmange, and his face softens. His wife smiles. "Marguerite made this especially for you," she says, "to help you feel better." He takes a spoonful. The texture is like nothing else, creamy and light, somehow substantial and delicate at the same time. The flavors are subtle but distinct. The slight nuttiness of the almond milk, the floral note of rosewater, the gentle sweetness of the sugar, the savory richness of the chicken that's so well integrated you almost don't notice it's there. But it provides depth, satisfaction. The pomegranate seeds burst in his mouth with little pops of tartness that brighten everything. "It's wonderful," he says quietly, and he means it. This isn't just food. It's care made tangible. It's Marguerite's skill and patience transformed into something that nourishes body and spirit, both. Blancmange became incredibly popular throughout medieval Europe. Recipes for it appear in cookbooks from England to Italy, from France to Germany. Each region had its variations. Some used fish instead of chicken for Lenten versions. Some added different spices. Some made it thicker or thinner. But the essential character remained the same. That pale, soothing, subtly sweet and savory creation that seemed to occupy its own category of food, and there was genuine medical theory behind its use for sick people. Medieval physicians believed in the concept of humor, the idea that the body contained four essential fluids that needed to be kept in balance for good health. White foods were considered cooling and moistening, perfect for fevers or inflammation. The chicken provided strength-building protein. The rice was easy to digest. The almonds were thought to be good for the lungs and brain. The sugar was stimulating and restorative. Put it all together, and you had a dish that was believed to actively promote healing. Whether it actually worked in a medical sense is debatable, of course. But think about what it meant to be sick in medieval times and have someone prepare this elaborate, expensive dish specifically for you. The psychological benefit alone must have been significant. The feeling of being cared for, of being worth the time and trouble and expense. That kind of comfort can't be measured, but it's real nonetheless. Let's linger a moment longer in Marguerite's kitchen. The day is fading now, and she's cleaning up, wiping down her work surfaces, hanging her spoons and ladles on their hooks. The fire is burning lower. The evening is gentle and calm. She thinks about how many times she's made this dish. For celebrations and for feast days and ordinary Tuesdays. It's almost like a meditation for her now. The rhythm of making it so familiar that it settles something in her soul. In a world that could be chaotic and uncertain, in medieval life certainly was both those things. There was something reassuring about recipes like this. Techniques passed down from cook to cook, mother to daughter, master to apprentice. A kind of continuity, a thread connecting past to present to future. Outside, the first stars are appearing. The robin has stopped singing. Somewhere in the house, a door closes softly. The day is ending, as days do, and soon everyone will sleep, and so should you, perhaps. Or at least, let yourself drift closer to that boundary between waking and dreaming. The stories continue, but there's no urgency, no pressure. Just these gentle images of kitchens long ago, of people preparing food with care, of flavors and textures that we can imagine, even if we can't taste them. The blancmange sits on the table, cooling slightly, waiting to be finished. The merchant will eat every bite and feel genuinely better, whether from the food itself or from the love baked into it. Does it really matter? Nourishment comes in many forms, And as we leave Marguerite's kitchen, as the light fades and the fire burns to embers, let's carry that feeling with us. That sense of something made with care, offered with kindness, received with gratitude. Let it become part of the soft blanket of sleepiness that's settling over you now, warm and comforting and gentle. Let's drift now, shall we, to a riverbank. It's early morning in the year 1220, somewhere in England, and the mist is rising from the water in soft, ghostly tendrils. The air is cool and damp, and everything smells of river water and green growing things, and the particular earthiness that comes right after dawn when the world is still waking up. A fisherman is checking his traps, his hands moving with practiced efficiency through the cold water. He's hoping for eels, maybe some nice trout if he's lucky. But what he pulls from his trap makes him grin with satisfaction. Lamprey, 3 of them, good-sized, writhing in that distinctive way they have. 2 modern eyes. Lamprey looked like something from a nightmare, those circular, tooth-filled mouths, the snake-like bodies, the primitive, almost alien appearance. But to this fisherman, they look like money, because lamprey are prized, sought, and he knows exactly where he can sell these for a good price by midday. Those lamprey are in the kitchen of a small castle, and the cook is preparing them for dinner in a way that's so elaborate, so specific, and frankly so weird that it's become one of the most famous medieval recipes in history. This is lamprey in galantini, or, as we might think of it, the ginger-drunk lamprey. And yes, I did say drunk, because that's essentially what's happening here. Let me tell you about lamprey first, because they're fascinating creatures. They're not actually fish, they're cyclostomes, jawless fish that have been around for something like 350 million years. They survived the mass extinction that killed the dinosaurs. They existed before trees. They're living fossils, essentially unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. And that ancient quality might be part of what appealed to medieval people, though they probably didn't think about it in those terms. Lamprey were especially prized in medieval England. They were eaten by royalty king. Henry I of England supposedly died from eating too many lamprey, what contemporaries called a surfeit of lampreys, though that story is probably more legend than fact. Still, it tells you something about their status. These were special occasion food, luxury items, worth going to considerable trouble to prepare correctly. And considerable trouble is putting it mildly. The cook in our castle-lets call him Edmund is, rolling up his sleeves, and approaching this task with the mixture of respect and mild disgust that lamprey tends to inspire. Because here's the thing, lamprey are covered in slime, a thick, viscous slime that serves some purpose in their river-welling life, but that makes them incredibly unpleasant to handle. Medieval cookbooks acknowledge this and offer a solution. You have to wash them. A lot. Edmund takes his first lamprey and dunks it in a bucket of water. He scrubs it with handfuls of salt, which helps cut through the slime. Then more water. Then more salt. Over and over, changing the water each time, until finally the lamprey is reasonably clean and no longer coated in that mucus layer. It takes the better part of an hour to clean all 3 fish, and by the end, Edmund's hands are wrinkled and cold, and he's more than ready to move on to the next step. Now comes the killing. Medieval cooks discovered something interesting about lamprey. If you kill them in wine, they don't just die, they basically marinate from the inside out. So Edmund has a bowl of red wine ready, not the good stuff, but decent enough, and he drops each lamprey into it, where they writhe for a moment before expiring. The wine turns slightly pink from their blood, and this liquid, this combination of wine and blood, will actually be saved and used in the sauce later. Waste not, want not, as they say. Once the lamprey are dead, Edmund has to prepare them for cooking. He cuts them into pieces about the length of your hand, each segment with its bit of backbone. The flesh is pale and dense, nothing like regular fish. It's oilier, richer, almost meat-like in texture. Medieval people loved it specifically for that richness, that feeling of luxury and substance. The pieces go into a pot of boiling water to parboil, just until they're partially cooked. This step is practically it, helps remove any remaining impurities, and begins the cooking process. The smell is distinctive, a bit fishy, but not unpleasantly so, mixed with the smell of the wine still clinging to the flesh. And now we get to the really interesting part, the galantini sauce. This is where the magic happens, where a fairly grim-looking water creature becomes a dish fit for the Lord's table. Edmund assembles his ingredients, and just listening to them is like hearing a spell being cast. Ginger, lots of ginger. So much ginger that this dish is practically defined by it. Cinnamon, pepper, cloves, breadcrumbs to thicken the sauce, and vinegar, which will give it that sharp, bright edge that cuts through the richness of the lamprey. The ginger is the star, though. Edmund has both dried ginger root that he has to grate and preserved ginger in syrup, sticky and potent. In 1220, ginger was expensive. It came all the way from Asia via trade routes that cross seas and deserts and mountain ranges. Every bit of it represents adventure and danger and the exotic unknown. Using this much in one dish is a statement of status. Edmund works his mortar and pestle, grinding the spices together with the breadcrumbs until they form a coarse powder. The scent is intense, spicy, and warm, and almost overwhelming in the small kitchen. His apprentice, hovering nearby, sneezes from the pepper, and Edmund smiles slightly. This happens every time. The spice mixture goes into a pot with some of that blood wine from killing the lamprey, along with fresh red wine to supplement it. Edmund adds the vinegar, stirring constantly as he heats it gently over the fire. The sauce begins to thicken from the breadcrumbs, becoming glossy and dark. He tastes it, adjusts, adds a bit more ginger, because you can never have too much in this recipe. A pinch more salt. The partially cooked lamprey pieces go into the sauce, and now they'll simmer for a good while, absorbing all those flavors. The spices penetrating the dense flesh, transforming it into something complex and fascinating. Edmund stirs, occasionally watching, adjusting the heat to keep it at a gentle bubble rather than a rolling boil. The kitchen is filled with that incredible smell. The sharpness of vinegar, the warmth of ginger and cinnamon, the depth of the wine, all combining into something that's simultaneously medieval and somehow timeless. If you walked into this kitchen right now, your mouth would water, despite the humble origins of the dish. Scent has that power, doesn't it? To bypass our rational minds and speak directly to something more primitive, more immediate. As the lamprey simmers, let's talk about why this dish became so famous, so sought. Part of it was surely the complexity of flavors. Medieval people had less access to variety in their daily diets than we do the same staples day in and day out for most people. So when they did get something special, something with layer upon layer of flavor, it must have been almost overwhelming in the best way. The richness of the lamprey, the heat of the ginger and pepper, the brightness of the vinegar, the sweetness of the wine, all playing off each other in every bite. But there was also texture. Lamprey has a distinctive mouthfeel, firm and meaty, with a slight chewiness, combined with the thick, clingy sauce. Each piece was a little adventure of flavor and sensation. You didn't just eat this dish quickly. You savored it, taking your time, experiencing it fully. And there may have been an element of daring to it, too. Lamprey looks scary. They look like something you shouldn't eat. There's a thrill in eating something that seems dangerous, or exotic, or just plain weird. It's the same impulse that makes people today seek out strange foods when they travel. Blut in the Philippines, hakarl in Iceland, fugu in Japan. The I ate that and survived bragging rights. By evening, the lamprey is ready. Edmund carefully transfers the pieces to a serving dish, spooning the thick, dark sauce over them generously. He garnishes with a bit of fresh parsley from the garden. Not for flavor, but for that pop of green against the dark sauce, making it visually appealing. At dinner, the lord of the castle and his family regard the dish with pleasure. They've had lamprey before. They know what to expect, and they're looking forward to it. Using pieces of bread as makeshift forks won't become common in England. For several more centuries, they take portions of the lamprey, the sauce soaking into the bread, combining starch and spice and rich flesh into something incredibly satisfying. Edmund has outdone himself, the lady of the castle remarks. And Edmund, standing near the kitchen door to observe the meal, as head cooks often did, allows himself a moment of pride. Yes, he has done well. The lamprey is perfectly cooked, tender, but not falling apart. The sauce is balanced, spicy, but not painfully so, with that lovely tang from the vinegar, keeping it from being cloying. This dish, in various forms, remained popular for centuries. The recipe evolved and changed as it traveled across Europe and through time. But the basic concept, lamprey, cooked with strong spices in a wine-based sauce persisted. Elizabeth I of England was apparently quite fond of lamprey. They were still being served at royal occasions into the 18th century. Today, lamprey has fallen out of fashion in most places, though they're still eaten in some regions. Portugal, for example, has a strong tradition of lamprey dishes. But for the most part, we've moved on to less intimidating seafood, which is perhaps a shame, because there's something wonderful about a food that has this much history, this much story attached to it. The same combination of flavors that someone in 1220 experienced, you could experience too if you were brave enough to track down lamprey and follow one of those ancient recipes. That's a kind of time travel, isn't it? Not in body, but in sense, in taste, in that moment when the flavor hits your tongue and you think, this is what they tasted, this is what they loved. As the meal in the castle winds down, as the lamprey is reduced to bones and sauce-soaked bread on the trenchers, as the fire burns lower and the evening deepens into night, there's a feeling of satisfaction in that hall. Bellies are full. The meal was good. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and tasks, but tonight, right now, everything is fine. Edmund returns to his kitchen, where his apprentice is already starting the cleanup. The pots need scrubbing, The floor needs sweeping, the fire needs banking for the night. It's the less glamorous part of cooking, but it's necessary, and there's a kind of meditation in it. The ritual of ending the day, putting things in order, preparing for tomorrow. Outside the river, where those lamprey were caught, continues its eternal flow. The water moves in darkness, reflecting starlight, cold and clean and timeless. Somewhere in its depths, more lamprey swim, ancient and strange, carrying on as their species has carried on for hundreds of millions of years, unaware that they sometimes become human food, unaware of everything except the river and their own simple existence. And we too should let our awareness become simpler now, narrower, focused only on comfort and rest. The stories continue, yes, but they're washing over you now, like that river, constant and soothing. You don't have to hold on to details. You don't have to remember everything. Just let the words flow past, carrying you gently toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the quiet dark where nothing is required of you except to rest. Picture, if you will, a crisp autumn day in the year 1480. We're in Italy this time, in a city, let's say Florence, because Florence was a center of artistic innovation in all its forms, including culinary arts. The leaves are turning gold and red, and there's a bite in the air that makes everyone walk a bit faster, pull their cloaks a bit tighter in the kitchen of a prosperous banker's household. Preparations are underway for a special dinner party. The banker is entertaining business associates, men he wants to impress, men whose goodwill and partnership could mean the difference between success and failure in his ventures. Everything must be perfect, and the showpiece of the meal, the thing everyone will talk about, is going to be a tart, but not just any tart. This is going to be a tart covered in gold. Now, let me be clear about something before we go further. When I say gold, I mean actual gold. Real, genuine, elemental gold, beaten into sheets so thin they're almost translucent, then applied to the surface of food. This wasn't paint. It wasn't some kind of simulation. This was the actual precious metal that people killed for, that kingdoms were built on, that ships crossed oceans to find. And medieval and Renaissance cooks put it on food. Why? Oh, that's a wonderful question, and the answer tells us so much about how people thought in this era. Gold was believed to be good for you. Seriously, medieval medicine held that gold had health-giving properties, that consuming it could prolong life, improve vitality, even cure certain diseases. Now, we know today that gold is biologically inert, passes through your system without being absorbed, doing neither harm nor good. But they didn't know that. They saw gold as pure, incorruptible, since it doesn't tarnish, and beautiful. And they translated those qualities into medical benefits. But beyond the supposed health benefits, there was pure showmanship. Imagine being a guest at this dinner and seeing a tart carried in that gleamed with actual gold. The message was unmistakable. Your host was so wealthy, so powerful, that he could literally let you eat his money. That's a flex of the highest order. Our cook today is named Alessandra, and she's been planning this tart for days. She's in her 40s, experienced and creative, known in Florence for her ability to create dishes that are as beautiful as paintings, which is appropriate, really, because Florence in 1480 is also the city of Botticelli, of Leonardo da Vinci, who's just starting his career, of art and beauty elevated to the highest forms. Alessandra sees her work as part of that same tradition. Food is art. Art is food. The boundaries are blurry and permeable. She's making what's called a torta dorada gilded tart. The base is a sweet pastry crust, which she prepared yesterday. Medieval and Renaissance pastry was different from what we know today. It tended to be firmer, sturdier, sometimes almost hard, because it needed to hold elaborate fillings without sagging or breaking. Alessandra's crust is made from fine white flour, butter, sugar, and egg yolks, mixed until it forms a dough that she then pressed into a wide, shallow pan. It's been pre-baked just until set but not browned, so it's ready for its filling. And what a filling! Alessandra is creating something that combines sweet and savory in that particularly Renaissance way. She starts with fresh cheese ricotta, creamy and mild. To this she adds sugar, cinnamon, and saffron. The saffron serves two purposes. It provides a subtle floral flavor, and it turns everything a gorgeous golden yellow, which is important, because the whole point of this tart is gold, not just on the surface, but in concept, in color, in the way it catches light. She also adds candied fruits, citron, and orange peel that she preserved herself earlier in the year, now chopped fine so they'll be distributed evenly through the filling. The fruits were cooked in honey and sugar until they became translucent and jewel-like, and now they'll add little bursts of intense sweetness and perfume to contrast with the mild cheese. There's rose water, too, just a careful amount, enough to add that floral note without making the whole thing taste like perfume. And pine nuts, toasted until golden, adding crunch and a resinous richness. She folds everything together gently, the mixture turning into something that looks like it's already glowing even before the gold is applied. The filling goes into the prepared crust, and Alessandra smooths the top carefully, making sure it's perfectly level. This matters for what comes next. The tart goes back into the oven, this time to cook the filling, to set it so it will slice cleanly rather than oozing everywhere when cut. The heat is moderate to hot, and the top will brown, which would ruin the effect she's going for. She wants it cooked but still pale, still that saffron gold, ready to receive its crowning glory. While the tart bakes, Alessandra prepares herself for the most delicate part of this operation. In a small wooden box, kept carefully in a dry place, she has gold leaf. These are sheets of pure gold that have been hammered by a specialist craftsman, a gold beater, until they're so thin that a pile of 100 sheets is barely thicker than a single sheet of paper. Each leaf is gossamer delicate, so fragile that your breath can tear it. Static electricity can ruin it. The slightest moisture can make it wrinkle and stick to itself irreparably. Working with gold leaf requires absolute calm, absolute steadiness. Alessandra has done this before, but it never stops being nervous. She waits for the tart to come out of the oven, to cool just enough to handle, but not so much that the surface becomes tacky. Temperature is critical. The kitchen has gone quiet. Her assistants know better than to disturb her during this process. Even the usual background noise seems muted. No one banging pots, no one chopping vegetables, just a respectful silence for the art about to be performed. Alessandra lays out her tools, a gilder's knife, which is really just a flat blade used to lift the gold leaf, a soft brush made from squirrel hair, and her courage. She opens the box and exposes the first sheet of gold leaf. It catches the light from the kitchen window and seems to glow with an inner fire. This is what people have fought wars over. This is what explorers will soon cross oceans to find. And she's about to put it on a dessert. She slides the gilder's knife under the gold leaf, lifting it carefully. It drapes over the blade like the ghost of fabric. Moving slowly, hardly breathing, she positions it over the tart and lowers it. The gold settles onto the surface of the filling, and where it touches, it adheres, drawn down by some slight oiliness in the mixture. Alessandra uses her soft brush to gently press the gold into contact with the tart, smoothing out any wrinkles, making sure there are no air bubbles. One sheet down, the process repeats. Another sheet of gold, another careful lift and transfer. The sheets overlap slightly, and where they do, the gold is double thick, even more lustrous. Slowly, painstakingly, the entire surface of the tart becomes covered. It takes perhaps 20 minutes, and by the end, Alessandra's hands are trembling slightly from the tension and care required. But when she steps back and looks at what she's created, the trembling stops. The tart is magnificent. It doesn't just look golden, it looks like gold itself, like the surface of a Byzantine icon, like treasure from a dragon's hoard. Light plays across it in liquid ripples. It's almost too beautiful to eat, almost. There's one final touch. Using a toothpick and working with incredible precision, Alessandra scratches a pattern into the gold leafa floral design. Simple but elegant. Where she scratches, the gold is removed, revealing the yellow filling beneath, creating a two-toned image. The contrast is stunning. This tart isn't just covered in gold anymore. It's decorated, personalized, and unique. As evening falls and the guests begin to arrive, as they're seated in the banker's finest room with its frescoed walls and carved furniture, as they're served wine and given dishes of olives and cheese to begin the meal, there's an air of anticipation. They know something special is coming. The banker has been dropping hints for days. The meal progresses through its courses. Soup with herbs and bread, roasted capon with a sauce, vegetables cooked in butter. Everything is excellent, but it's not exceptional. The guests are pleased, but not overwhelmed. They're waiting, and then Alessandra herself carries in the golden tart. She doesn't trust this to a servant, not something this precious, this perfect. She walks slowly, holding the tart before her like an offering, and as she enters the dining room, there's an audible gasp. The tart catches the candlelight and seems to be lit from within. It gleams, glitters, For a moment, no one speaks. They just stare. And the banker, watching their faces, knows he has succeeded. They will remember this. They will talk about this. His reputation for hospitality, for refinement, for having the wealth to pull off something this extravagant. It's all confirmed. At this moment, Alessandra sets the tart on the table and makes the first cut. Her knife slides through the gold leaf, through the filling, through the crust, and everyone leans forward to see. The interior is revealed, that beautiful saffron yellow filling studded with jewel-like fruits and nuts, the layers of pastry beneath. She serves the first slice to the guest of honor, placing it carefully on a delicate ceramic plate. He takes his first bite, and his expression transforms into something like wonder. The filling is creamy and sweet, with those complex notes of cinnamon and saffron. The fruits burst with concentrated flavor. The pine nuts add texture, The crust provides a buttery, crumbly contrast. And the gold leaf, well, it has no flavor. But knowing it's there, seeing it on every bite, adds something psychological to the experience. This isn't just good food. This is luxury made edible. This is wealth you can taste. Around the table, as each guest receives their slice, the reaction is similar. Delight, amazement, a kind of disbelief that such a thing exists. They eat slowly, savoring every bite, reluctant for it to end. And they talk, their conversation animated, excited, impressed beyond measure. In the kitchen, Alessandra cleans up, her heart still beating a bit faster from the adrenaline of working with the gold leaf. She's satisfied, not proud in a boastful way, but satisfied in the way of any artist who's executed their vision successfully. She created beauty today. She created an experience. That's worth something. That matters. The tradition of gilded foods continued for quite some time in Europe. Gold leaf appeared on everything from meats to fruits to elaborate sugar sculptures. It was particularly popular in Renaissance Italy, but spread to France, England, and beyond. Even today, you can still find gold leaf on fancy desserts in high-end restaurants, though it's become more of a novelty than a standard practice. But there's something particularly Renaissance about this tart, about this intersection of art and food and wealth and chemistry and showing off. The Renaissance was all about pushing boundaries, about rediscovering ancient knowledge and creating new wonders, about the idea that humans could make beautiful things that reflected the beauty of creation itself. A gilded tart fits perfectly into that worldview. It's excessive, yes, but it's also sincere in its exuberance, in its joy in beauty, for beauty's sake. As the evening winds down, as the guests finally finish the last crumbs of tart and lean back in their chairs, contentedly full, warmed by wine and food and good company, there's a sense of having participated in something special, not just a meal, but an event, a moment that divides time into before and after. Before we saw the golden tart, after we tasted it. And perhaps that's the real purpose of dishes like this. Not nutrition, not even really pleasure in the simple sense, but the creation of moments, of memories, of stories that will be told and retold. Remember that dinner at Giovanni's house when there was a tart covered in actual gold? That story will be told for years. It will be embellished, exaggerated, passed on to children and grandchildren. It becomes part of the fabric of memory that makes up a life, a community, a culture. The candles burn lower. The fire in the hearth settles to coals. Servants begin clearing the table quietly, efficiently. Outside, Florence sleeps under a dark autumn sky, its streets empty. Its artists and bankers and cooks and beggars all abed, dreaming whatever dreams people dream. And we too can drift now, can let this image of the golden tart fade into the general warm glow of sleepiness. The gleam of gold becomes the gleam of starlight. The warmth of the kitchen becomes the warmth of your bed. The story continues. But you don't have to follow every word now. Just let it wash over you, a river of words, a gentle current carrying you toward rest. Let's wander now into a different season, a different mood. It's midwinter, let's say the year 1350, and we're in Germany. Snow lies thick on the ground, and the world has that peculiar muffled quality that snow brings, where sounds are dampened and everything feels closer. more intimate. Inside a manor house, the kitchen is the warmest room, the heart of the building. And it's where we'll spend some time today. The cook, whose name is Gertrude, is preparing something that will make the children of the household absolutely squeal with delight. She's making a hedgehog, not a real hedgehog. Of course, those are hibernating under leaves, somewhere tucked away until spring. This is a culinary hedgehog, a creation of meat and spices and imagination that will look so realistic the children will be convinced. It's about to scurry off the plate. This dish, sometimes called a hedgehog, sometimes a porcupine, depending on regional variations, was surprisingly popular across medieval Europe. It appeared at both grand feasts and more modest family dinners. The recipe varied wildly from place to place, but the concept was always the same. Create something that looked like a small animal, complete with spines. Using ordinary meat and some creative presentation, Gertrude's version starts with pork. She has a good piece from a pig butchered a few weeks ago, well-aged and flavorful. She chops the meat fine, using a heavy knife with a practiced rocking motion that's rhythmic and almost musical. Thunk, 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 the blade hitting the cutting board in a steady beat. The meat becomes increasingly fine, almost paste-like, though she leaves some texture to it. To the meat she adds breadcrumbs that have been soaked in wine until they're soft and have absorbed all that flavor. Then come the spices, pepper, of course, and ginger, but also something called grains of paradise, a spice from West Africa that tastes like a combination of pepper, cardamom, and citrus. It was fashionable in medieval cooking, traded along the same routes that brought other exotic goods to Europe. She also adds sage from her dried bundles, crumbled fine, and a little salt. Most importantly, she adds eggs, 2 of them cracked into the mixture and worked in with her hands. The eggs will act as a binder, holding everything together as it cooks. Medieval cooks understood this principle, even if they didn't know the science behind it. They knew that eggs made things stick, made things hold their shape, and that was enough. Gertrude works the mixture with her hands, squeezing and kneading until everything is well combined, until the texture is even throughout. Her hands are cold, it's winter, and even this close to the fire, there's a chill in the air, but the work warms them. There's something satisfying about this kind of manual labor, about feeling the food come together under your fingers, becoming more than the sum of its parts. Now comes sculpting, and this is where Gertrude's artistry really shows. She takes a large handful of the meat mixture and begins shaping it on a board. First, a basic oval body. Then she extends one end slightly to form a head, narrows it to suggest a snout. The other end she tapers for the back of the creature. She works with both hands, smoothing, adjusting, stepping back to look, moving in again to refine. Slowly, the amorphous lump of meat begins to look like something recognizable. A small animal, crouched and compact, but it's not a hedgehog yet, not without spines. And here's where Gertrude's plan gets really clever. She has a bowl of blanched whole almonds, that have been briefly boiled so their skins slip off, leaving them pale and smooth. She's been saving these for this specific purpose. Now she takes them, one by one, and pushes them into the meat mixture at an angle, so they stick out like spines. All over the back of the creature, row after row of almond spines, each positioned carefully to look natural, To mimic the defensive posture of a real hedgehog, it takes a long time. Each almond has to be placed individually, pushed in far enough to hold, but not so far that it disappears into the meat. Gertrude works patiently, her hands moving steadily, occasionally warming them near the fire when they get too cold to work precisely. The kitchen is quiet, except for the pop and crackle of the fire and the fire's occasional voice from elsewhere in the house. Peaceful, meditative. Finally, the last almond is placed. Gertrude steps back to admire her work. There on the board sits a creature that genuinely looks hedgehog-like. The almonds bristle from its back at convincing angles. The shape of the body is right. For the final touch, she takes 2 peppercorns and presses them in 4 eyes and a bit of clove for the nose. Now it's unmistakably a leaf, looking characterful even. The hedgehog goes into the oven on its board, and here Gertrude's timing and temperature control become critical. Too hot and the almonds will burn before the meat is cooked. Too cool and it will take forever and might dry out. She needs a moderate, even heat, and she needs to baste the creation periodically with butter or fat to keep it moist and to help the almonds turn golden. Over the next hour, as the hedgehog roasts, the kitchen fills with the most wonderful smell. The pork is cooking, rendering its fat, becoming brown and savory. The almonds are toasting, developing their own nutty fragrance. The spices are releasing their aromatics. It all combines into something that makes everyone who passes through the kitchen stop and inhale deeply and ask, "What are you making?" Gertrude smiles but doesn't answer. Let them wonder. Let it be a surprise. She bastes the hedgehog carefully, using a spoon to drizzle melted butter over it, making sure the almonds get coated so they'll turn a nice golden color. Each time she opens the oven, a wave of heat and scent rolls out. The hedgehog is browning nicely, holding its shape perfectly. The eggs are doing their job, keeping everything together even as the meat cooks and firms up. Finally, it's done. Gertrude removes the board from the oven and sets it on the work table to rest for a few minutes. The hedgehog sits there, looking absurdly realistic, its almond spines gleaming with butter, its peppercorn eyes somehow suggesting personality. It's whimsical and charming and just a little bit silly, and Gertrude loves it. When the time comes for the midday meal, Gertrude herself carries the hedgehog into the dining hall. The family is gathered, the lord and lady, their 3 children ranging from about 5 to 12 years old, and a visiting relative. They're expecting a normal winter meal, maybe a stew or a roast. They are not expecting what they see. The youngest child actually gasps and points. It's a hedgehog. A real hedgehog. No, says the older sister, who's more worldly. It's made of food. Look, those spines are almonds. But even she is delighted, leaning forward to see better, her face lit with curiosity and pleasure. The parents are smiling, amused by their children's reactions, and impressed by Gertrude's craftsmanship. Shall we eat it? The Lord asks, and the youngest child looks momentarily stricken, as if they're about to consume a pet. But hunger and curiosity win out. Yes, she says, but can I have one of the spines? The hedgehog is carved carefully, because even now it seems wrong to just hack into it with a knife. Each person receives a portion of the meat with several almond spines on the side. The meat is perfectly cooked, juicy and flavorful, the spices coming through clearly but not overwhelming the pork. The almonds are crunchy and buttery, a delightful textural contrast to the soft meat. There's something about food shaped like something else that just makes people happy. Maybe it's the playfulness of it, the acknowledgement that eating doesn't have to be purely functional, that there's room for whimsy and creativity and fun. The children talk about the hedgehog for the rest of the day, and the youngest draws a picture of it later with charcoal on a scrap of parchment, trying to capture the way those almonds bristled from its back. This kind of shaped or molded dish was popular throughout the medieval period. Cooks made all sorts of creatures, fish shaped from pounded pike, birds reconstructed from chopped meat, even castles and ships made from pastry and marzipan. These weren't just showing off, though there was certainly an element of that. They were also entertainment in an era before television, before books were common, when any kind of visual surprise or novelty was precious. And there's a kindness in it, too, isn't there? Gertrude didn't have to make a hedgehog. She could have just roasted the meat in a normal way and served it normally. But she took the time, used her skill and imagination to create something that would make the children smile. That's a small act of love, really, creating joy where it didn't have to exist. As the meal winds down and the family disperses to their various afternoon activities, Gertrude returns to the kitchen. The board that held the hedgehog has only scraps left on atop few crumbs of meat, one almond that fell off. It's been thoroughly enjoyed, thoroughly consumed. She cleans up with satisfaction, warming her chest. This is why she does this work. Not just to fill bellies, but to create these moments, these memories. Outside, the snow continues to fall, adding to the already considerable drifts. The world is white and quiet, and inside this manor, people are warm and fed, and, for this moment at least, content. The fire burns steadily. The afternoon light, already dimming because winter days are short, slants through the small windows. Somewhere upstairs, the youngest child is still talking about the hedgehog, describing it to a doll or an imaginary friend. The details already getting more elaborate in the retelling. And this is how stories grow, how memories are made. Simple dish, cleverly presented, becomes a tale that's told and retold, that gets passed down through generations. My great-great-grandmother once told me about a cook who made a hedgehog from pork and almonds, and it looked so real you could almost see it breathe. We carry these stories with us, don't we? The things that delighted us, that surprised us, that made us see the world as more magical than we thought it was. Food memories are powerful because they engage so many senses at once. Taste, yes, but also smell and sight and touch and even sound. They become anchored deep in our brains, more permanent than many other kinds of memories. And so the hedgehog lives on, in a way. Not the actual dish, which was consumed and digested centuries ago, its molecules long since recycled into other forms, but the idea of it, the joy of it, persists. Recipes for hedgehog dishes appear in cookbooks from across Europe and across centuries. Each region has its variation, its own spin on the concept, but they're all linked by that same impulse to create something that makes people smile, that adds a bit of wonder to an ordinary day. Let's linger a moment longer in this winter kitchen, in this warm space carved out of the cold. The fire is burning lower now, and soon Gertrude will need to add another log. But for now, there's just the glow of coals, the residual warmth, the feeling of work completed, and completed well. Outside, perhaps a bird calls some hardy winter species that hasn't migrated, its voice clear in the cold air. The sound carries across the snow-covered fields, reaching no one in particular, just adding to the quiet symphony of a winter afternoon. And you, listening to this story, you can let yourself sink deeper into comfort now. Let the image of that playful hedgehog make you smile as you drift. Let the warmth of Gertrude's kitchen surround you. There's nothing to do, nowhere to be, just this gentle drift toward sleep, carried along by stories of people who lived so long ago but who felt and created and loved in ways we can still recognize, still understand, still appreciate. The snow falls, the fire burns, and the stories continue, soft as a whisper, steady as a heartbeat, guiding you gently toward dreams. For our final journey tonight, let's step into the most fantastical of all medieval culinary creations. It's the year 1520, and we're in England, in the kitchen of a palace. Not just any palace, but one where a feast is being prepared for nobility of the highest order. The air is electric with anticipation and pressure. Everything must be perfect. And the pièce de résistance, the thing that will leave every guest speechless with wonder, is being crafted right now by a specialist called a sugar artist. His name is Richard, and his title is Master of Subtleties. A subtlety, sometimes spelled Sotelt, was the medieval name for an elaborate sugar sculpture presented at the end of a feast or between courses. These weren't meant to be eaten, or not primarily. They were meant to be seen, to be experienced, to leave an impression. They were the fireworks displays of their era, the grand finale, the thing everyone waited for with bated breath. And what Richard is creating tonight is extraordinary, even by the standards of subtleties. He's making a castle. Not a simple castle, not just a tower or two. A complete castle with walls and turrets and tiny windows and flags flying from the battlements, all made from sugar. And inside the castle, visible through the windows, will be small figures, knights, ladies, even a miniature king, all also made from sugar. All positioned as if in the middle of a banquet of their own. Let me take you through this process, because it's absolutely fascinating. Sugar in 1520 was expensive, incredibly so. It comes from sugarcane plantations, mostly in Cyprus and Sicily, and it's refined through a labor-intensive process. It arrives in hard cones that have to be broken down, purified further, and then worked into usable forms. The sugar Richard is using is the finest available, almost completely white, as pure as the technology of the time can make it. He's been working on this castle for 3 days already. Sugar work can't be rushed. Each element has to be crafted carefully, allowed to dry and harden before the next piece can be added. Richard starts by making a paste from sugar, water, and gum, tragacanth, a substance derived from the sap of certain Middle Eastern plants. When mixed in the right proportions and kneaded together, this creates something like modeling clay, except it's pure white, slightly translucent, and once it dries, it becomes hard and durable. The base of the castle is a thick platform, textured and painted to look like rocky ground. Richard made this first, allowing it to dry completely so it would support the weight of everything else. Now, 3 days later, it's rock hard, stable, ready. The walls come next. Richard rolls out sheets of sugar paste, cuts them to precise measurements, and positions them upright on the base. He uses a mixture of sugar syrup boiled to just the right consistency as glue. This is delicate work because the walls need to be perfectly vertical, and sugar paste, while pliable when fresh, wants to slump under its own weight. He uses temporary support sticks of wood that will be removed later to hold everything in place until the sugar glue sets. Hour by hour, the castle grows. Towers rise at the corners, each one carefully constructed from more sugar paste, with tiny windows cut out using a knife the size of a needle. Richard's hands are steady from years of practice, but even so, he works slowly, checking each element from multiple angles before moving on to the next. The detail he's incorporating is astonishing. The walls have a texture pressed into them to simulate stone blocks. The battlements have proper crenellations, the up and down notched design that real castle walls have. The flags are gossamer thin sugar, dyed with vegetable colors red, blue, gold, and attached to wire supports so they appear to flutter. There's a drawbridge made from thin sugar strips, actually functional, on tiny sugar hinges. There's a moat represented by blue-tinted sugar syrup, poured into a depression in the base and allowed to harden, looking for all the world like still water. And then there are the figures. These are the most challenging parts of the entire creation. Each one is only a few inches tall, but they need to be recognizable as human, need to have proportion and posture that read correctly. Richard sculpts them individually using tools he made himself: wire loops, small knives, needles. He starts with a basic armature, a skeleton made from wire, and then adds sugar paste in layers. Building up the form, a knight in armor, Richard presses tiny patterns into the sugar to suggest chainmail, adds a miniature helmet, a sword the size of a toothpick, a lady in a gown. He creates the illusion of flowing fabric with careful sculpting and painting. Her tiny face, just a suggestion of features, but somehow expressive anyway. The king on his throne, crowned, regal, impossibly small and yet perfectly detailed. Each figure takes hours. Richard's workspace is silent as he concentrates, his world narrowing to just his hands and the sugar and the vision in his mind. His apprentices watch from a respectful distance, learning, though they know it will be years before they can attempt to work this fine. This is mastery. This is what a lifetime of practice looks like. By the third day, the castle is nearly complete. Richard has worked almost without sleep, taking only brief breaks to rest his eyes and hands. The kitchen continues its usual chaos around him, meals being prepared, servants rushing about, fires roaring, but his corner is an island of focused calm. Even the noise seems to flow around him rather than disturb him. The final touch is the painting. Using brushes made from single hairs and paint, created from vegetable dyes mixed with sugar syrup, Richard adds color to the castle. Not garish, not overwhelming, just touches. The flags, as I mentioned, some of the clothing on the figures, the occasional window shutter or door. The effect is to bring the whole thing to life, to add that final layer of realism that makes observers forget, just for a moment, that this is made from the same stuff they stir into their tea when it's done. When Richard finally steps back and allows himself to really look at what he's created, even he who has made dozens of subtleties over his career is impressed. The castle is beautiful. It's whimsical and majestic at the same time. The late afternoon sun, streaming through the kitchen window, catches the sugar and makes the whole thing seem to glow from within. Light passes through the walls slightly, giving them an ethereal, almost magical quality. The tiny figures cast shadows that make them seem alive. Richard's assistants come closer, drawn by the unspoken permission to look. They circle the subtlety, pointing out details to each other in whispers. Look at the knight's sword. See how the lady's dress moves. The king looks like he's actually sitting. The appreciation in their voices warms Richard more than any formal praise could. This is what he lives for, creating something that moves people, that makes them see sugar not as a sweet substance, but as a medium for art. That evening, when the feast begins, Richard doesn't attend as a guest. He's working, of course, still in his kitchen, still covered in sugar dust. But he knows what's happening in the great hall. The courses are being served: soup, fish, meat, more meat, vegetables, bread, everything elaborate and expensive and calculated to impress. Between courses, entertainers perform. Musicians play. The hall is warm with bodies and bright with candles, and the conversation is loud and animated. And then, after the final course, after everyone is thoroughly full and thinking the evening is winding down, the subtlety is brought out. Richard has entrusted this to his most reliable apprentice. The boy carries the castle on a large board, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid any jarring that might crack the delicate sugar. Behind him, other servants carry torches, positioned to light the subtlety from behind, to make it glow even more dramatically. As the procession enters the hall, silence falls. Every head turns, and then a collective gasp. Even these jaded nobles, who have seen many wonders, who attend elaborate feasts regularly, are stunned. The castle seems to float in the torchlight, almost alive. People rise from their seats to get a closer look, crowding around but careful not to touch. Is it truly made from sugar? Someone asks, and the apprentice confirms that yes, every bit of it is sugar, crafted by Master Richard over 3 days. The questions come fast. How is it held together? How were the figures made? Can we eat it? The answer to this last is technically yes, but it seems almost sacrilegious to destroy something so beautiful. The castle is placed on a central table where everyone can see it, and for the rest of the evening, guests keep drifting over to look at it again, to point out new details they hadn't noticed before, to shake their heads in amazement. The subtlety has done its job. It created a moment of shared wonder, gave everyone something to talk about, elevated the entire feast into something memorable. In the kitchen, Richard finally allows himself to relax. His work is done. The subtlety was successful. He permits himself a cup of wine, sitting near the fire, feeling the deep tiredness that comes after intense concentration. His hands ache. His eyes are strained, but his heart is full. Tomorrow, the castle will probably be taken apart, the sugar repurposed or given as gifts in pieces. That's fine. Its purpose wasn't to last forever. Its purpose was this night, this moment, this wonder. Subtleties became increasingly elaborate throughout the late medieval period and into the Renaissance. They featured castles, ships, gardens, mythological scenes, and religious tableaux. Some were enormous, requiring multiple people to carry them. Some incorporated mechanical elements, figures that moved, fountains that flowed with rosewater. They were the Instagram moments of their era, the things people described in letters, the stories that spread across Europe about who had seen what amazing subtlety at which feast. And there's something both wonderful and melancholy about them, isn't there? All that work, all that skill and time and expensive material for something so temporary. But maybe that's part of the point. Maybe ephemerality is what makes them special. We value things partly because they don't last, because we know we'll never see exactly that combination of circumstances again. The subtlety in that hall, on that night, with those people, that exact moment, existed once and never again. And everyone there knew it, felt it, appreciated it more because of it. As the night deepens and the feast finally ends, as guests depart and servants begin the long cleanup, as candles are snuffed and fires banked and the palace slowly settles into nighttime quiet, Richard makes his way to his own small room. He's exhausted but content. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new projects, perhaps another feast, another subtlety, or perhaps something smaller, simpler. It doesn't matter. The work is what matters. The craft, the reaching toward beauty, toward excellence, toward creating something that didn't exist before. He falls asleep almost immediately. His dreams perhaps touched with sugar castles and tiny knights and the glow of torchlight through translucent walls. And let's leave him there, sleeping peacefully after his labor. Let's leave the silent palace, the snuffed candles, the remains of the feast being cleared away by tired servants. Let's drift back through the centuries, back through all these stories we've wandered through together. The peacock spectacular, with its iridescent feathers and fire-breathing beak. The gentle blancmange, made with care for someone feeling ill. The lamprey, drunk on wine and dressed in ginger-heavy sauce. The tart covered in actual gold. The whimsical hedgehog, bristling with almond spines. And finally, this castle of sugar, beautiful and temporary and perfect. These dishes, these creations, they tell us so much about the people who made them, about their values, their creativity, their desire to bring wonder into the world. They worked with what they had, ingredients we might find strange, tools we'd consider primitive, techniques passed down through oral tradition and patient practice. And they made magic. They made art. They made moments that mattered. And isn't that what we all do in our own ways? Try to create something beautiful, something meaningful, something that brings joy to ourselves and others, even knowing it's temporary, even knowing that time will eventually erase all evidence it ever existed. The cook stirring the pot, the painter at the easel, the parent reading to a child, the friend listening patiently, the worker taking pride in a job done well. We're all making our own subtleties, our own hedgehogs, our own moments of care and craft. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. May you drift through sleep with images of torchlit halls and warm kitchens, of spices and sugar, of food made with love and presented with pride. May you wake rested, renewed, carrying perhaps just a whisper of these stories with you into your day. And if you drifted off somewhere along this journey, that's perfect. That's exactly what these tales were meant to decreate, a soft, gentle current of words and images that carried you away from the concerns of the day and into restful sleep. If you found peace here, if this helped you unwind, let me know below. Tell me which story caught your imagination, or if you'd like to hear about other obscure corners of history. Sweet dreams Friends, may your rest be deep and your dreams be gentle. Until we meet again, good night.